There comes a moment in every woman's life when she grows tired of pretending she's fine. Not because she's weak, but because she's been strong for too long. The kind of strong that breaks quietly, in private, where no one sees. She's smiled through storms, carried peace for everyone else, and whispered prayers through tears she never let fall. And one morning she just couldn't do it anymore. That's where her story began. Not in the rising, but in the stillness between falling and standing again. In that quiet ache of a heart that wanted to believe, but didn't know how. She hadn't lost her faith. She'd just lost her strength to perform it. And somewhere in that silence where her prayers ran out of words, grace found her. It didn't come loud or shining. It came soft, a gentle stirring that whispered, "You don't have to stay here." At first she didn't believe it. She thought beginnings were for other people, for the ones who hadn't failed, for the ones who hadn't said, "I can't do this anymore." But grace isn't a prize for the perfect. It's a refuge for the tired. She used to think starting over meant she had failed, that if her faith were stronger, she wouldn't need to begin again. But maybe grace was never about one moment of victory. Maybe it's about returning, again and again, to the same gentle love that never left. Grace doesn't end where you think it does. It circles back, patient and kind, waiting for your yes. And when she finally whispered that yes, it wasn't dramatic. It was small, quiet. She sat on the edge of her bed and said, "Okay, I'll try again." No grand plan, no instant strength, just a tired heart choosing to trust that maybe, even now, God still had something left for her. She didn't have clarity or control. All she had was a flicker, fragile, but real. And sometimes that's enough, because grace doesn't give you the whole map. It gives you one step, one breath, one more morning. Maybe this isn't a story about strength at all. Maybe it's about surrender, about a woman who finally stopped chasing the life she thought she should have, and began to live the one grace had been offering her all along. It's not the story of someone who never broke. It's the story of someone who did. And began again. If you've ever felt like it's too late, it isn't. If you've ever wondered if your hands are still worthy of holding something new, they are. And if you've ever believed that God's done with you, He isn't. Grace never needed your perfection, only your permission to begin again. So if these words meet you where you are, if they remind you that even broken hearts can bloom again, then subscribe, not for perfection, but for the gentle reminder that here we begin again, together. She used to believe that strength meant holding everything together, that real faith looked like endurance, like smiling through exhaustion, forgiving without boundaries, praying without pause. She became the woman everyone leaned on, the one who always said, "I'm fine," even when she wasn't. And for a while, that worked. Until it didn't, because one day the weight got too heavy, not all at once. It never does, but piece by piece. Small disappointments she never processed. Quiet heartbreaks she never spoke about. The endless pressure to be light for everyone else while walking through her own darkness. And before she knew it, her spirit began to ache in places she couldn't name. She prayed harder, served more, smiled wider, but the peace never came back. And that's when she realized something she'd been too afraid to admit. She wasn't tired because she lacked faith. She was tired because she'd mistaken self-sacrifice for surrender. She'd given everything she had, except her own heart. So one night, when silence filled the room and her strength finally cracked, she stopped pretending. No filters, no verses rehearsed to sound strong, just tears, soft and human. And in that unguarded space, she whispered words she'd never said before. "God, I can't carry this anymore." The words didn't fix anything, but they freed her. For the first time in years, she let herself fall apart, and instead of feeling shame, she felt relief. Because Grace had been waiting for that moment. The moment she stopped trying to be her own savior. She thought faith was about always being brave. But now she saw that faith also looks like falling into arms you can't see, trusting they'll still be there when you land. Her strength wasn't gone. It was simply shifting, becoming something gentler, deeper, and far more holy. And as she breathed, really breathed, for the first time in what felt like forever, she understood that surrender wasn't giving up. It was giving back. Back to the one who never asked her to carry the world alone. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of rest. After she let go, the world felt quiet. Almost too quiet. No music, no noise, no rush to fix things. Just silence. The kind that makes you uncomfortable at first. Because it forces you to listen. Not to the world, but to yourself. She'd always filled that silence with effort. With words. With prayers she hoped would bring answers. But now there were none. Just stillness. For the first few days she hated it. The silence felt like distance, like maybe heaven had stopped listening. She looked for signs, for confirmation that she hadn't been forgotten. But there was only quiet, like a deep breath she didn't know how to take. And yet, underneath that stillness, something sacred was beginning to stir. She didn't notice it at first. It was in small things, the way the morning light fell on her hands, the rhythm of her breathing, the peace she felt when she stopped trying to fill every second. The silence that once felt like punishment began to feel like presence. It was as if God had never stopped speaking. She had just stopped slowing down long enough to hear him. Sometimes healing doesn't sound like a miracle. Sometimes it sounds like nothing at all. No voice from the clouds. No sudden revelation. Just the slow, quiet returning of your own heartbeat. The sound of your soul remembering what peace feels like. And in that sacred calm, she began to see that not every unanswered prayer is a rejection. Some are invitations to rest. The silence became her teacher. It showed her that love doesn't always arrive in words. Sometimes it comes in the pause, in the waiting, in the unspoken assurance that you are still held even when you can't hear anything. And as the days passed, she stopped fearing the quiet. She began to lean into it, not to escape the noise, but to find herself within it. And slowly, she realized that the silence wasn't empty after all. It was full of grace, full of patience, full of God's quiet mercy. She didn't need to fill it with performance or proof. She just needed to be still enough to feel the heartbeat of heaven align with her own. And in that moment, without a word, she was healed. Not by answers, but by peace. Healing didn't arrive as a sudden sunrise. It came quietly, through small things, the kind she used to overlook. The soft hum of the kettle in the morning. The way her dog rested his head on her lap without asking anything from her. The warmth of clean sheets after a long day. It wasn't grand or loud, but somehow it was enough. She started to notice how grace hid in the ordinary, in the laughter of a friend who didn't need an explanation, in a stranger's smile at the grocery store, in the simple rhythm of breathing without hurry. These weren't miracles, not in the usual sense, but they carried the quiet weight of divine tenderness. Every small moment became a thread pulling her back toward life. Back toward joy. She'd spent so long chasing big answers that she'd forgotten how heaven often speaks in details, in crumbs of light scattered through an ordinary day. The small things weren't small anymore. They were survival disguised as routine. She began to write again, not for clarity, but for release. Short prayers scribbled in the margins of notebooks, half-thoughts that started with pain and ended with peace. Her words didn't sound strong, but they were true. And truth, she learned, doesn't need to be polished to be powerful. Sometimes the truest prayers are the ones we whisper while washing dishes. She also began to laugh again. At silly things, at herself, at the memory of who she once was. The laughter didn't erase the pain, but it made room for something new to grow beside it. Grief and joy began to share the same space, and that's when she realized healing isn't about replacing the broken parts. It's about learning to live gently with them. The more she slowed down, the more she realized she'd been living surrounded by miracles all along. Not the kind that change circumstances, but the kind that change the way you see. And she started to believe that maybe the life she thought she'd lost was quietly waiting for her to notice it again. By the time she sat down one evening, hands wrapped around a mug of tea and heart finally still, she knew something had shifted. Not everything was perfect, far from it. But she was here, breathing, alive, and grateful. And that, she thought, might just be the greatest miracle of all. For the longest time, she spoke about grace like it was something far away, a place she might reach someday if she worked hard enough, if she prayed beautifully enough, if she could just stop disappointing herself. But somewhere between the silence and the small things, something changed. She didn't find grace. It found her. It began quietly, the way peace always does. One morning she looked in the mirror and didn't flinch. Her reflection was the same tired eyes, same imperfect smile, but her gaze was softer. She didn't see failure staring back anymore. She saw someone who had survived the storm and learned how to breathe again. She realized then that grace had never been chasing perfection. It had been chasing her heart. All this time, she thought she needed to prove her worth, to earn peace, to deserve joy. But the truth was simpler. She was already loved before she ever did a thing right. And once that truth sank in, everything around her seemed to slow down. The world hadn't changed, but she had. She was lighter now, not because the pain was gone, but because she finally stopped carrying it alone. She stopped apologizing for her process, for healing slowly, for needing rest, for not being what she used to be. She stopped comparing her pace to someone else's miracle. She began to trust that maybe her timing was holy too, that grace doesn't rush. It rebuilds, piece by piece, moment by moment, until the fragments of your heart start to resemble something whole again. One night, as she sat by her window, a soft wind passed through the curtains and brushed her face. It wasn't dramatic, just a tender reminder that she was still here, still chosen, still becoming, and she smiled. The kind of smile that comes from the soul, the kind that doesn't need an audience. She whispered softly, "I believe it now." Not as a declaration, but as a sigh of peace. And that's when she understood what grace really was. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of love that refuses to leave. Not the erasing of the past, but the gentle rewriting of its meaning. Grace had waited patiently for her to see what had been true all along, that she was never too far gone to be found again. From that night on, faith didn't feel like a mountain to climb. It felt like home, the kind of home you return to after a long journey, familiar, safe, and filled with light that doesn't demand perfection. And as the dawn began to rise outside her window, she whispered once more, not as a prayer, but as gratitude. "I finally believe it." She used to think beginnings had to look like fireworks. That redemption came with a trumpet sound, that healing would feel like a rush of light. But now she knows. Sometimes beginnings sound like breathing. Sometimes they look like a woman sitting quietly with her coffee, finally unafraid of the day ahead. She doesn't carry the same urgency anymore. She's not trying to fix every broken piece or earn back every lost moment. She's learned that grace doesn't rewind time, it redeems it. It takes what was meant for loss and turns it into tenderness, weaving beauty through everything that once hurt. There are still days when she forgets, when the old voices come back, whispering that she should have done more, been better, prayed harder. But she knows those voices now. She greets them kindly and lets them pass. Because she's found something deeper than perfection. Peace that stays, even when everything else fades. Her life still has questions, but they don't scare her like they used to. The silence that once felt heavy now feels holy. The small things that once went unnoticed now feel like gifts. And she's learned to walk slower, to listen, to feel, to trust that even when nothing seems certain, something sacred is still holding her together. She doesn't need to see the finish line anymore. Every sunrise is enough. Every step forward, even the trembling ones, is a victory. And every time she chooses peace over performance, she's beginning again. Because beginnings aren't proof that you figured life out. They're proof that grace never gave up on you. So tonight, if you're listening with tired eyes and a heavy heart, know this: you're not behind. You're not forgotten. You're right where grace expected you to be. And even if it doesn't feel like much right now, you're already living your new beginning. The one that started the moment you chose not to give up. And maybe one day, when the world quiets down and you're alone with your thoughts, you'll remember this. The same light that found her will find you too. It always does. Because grace doesn't lose its way. It finds yours. Take a deep breath, love. This isn't the end of your story. It's the gentle unfolding of something new. The quiet proof that even after all this time, you still have it in you to begin again. And if these words found you tonight, if they reminded you that your small steps still matter, then stay with us. This space, this channel, was made for women who are still learning to rise softly. So subscribe, not for perfection, but for peace. Because here, we don't chase flawless lives. We honor faithful hearts. And maybe one day you'll look back and realize what she did. You never started over alone. Grace was there. Every step, every silence, every time you began again. Always.